It's really quite remarkable how much debate there is over Psalm 127, this short psalm of just 5 verses, the eighth of the 15 songs of ascent. Despite a generally reliable introductory heading, which tells us that Solomon is the author, there is certainly no universal agreement that that is correct. There's also lack of agreement about what the author, Solomon or otherwise, is talking about in the first half of the psalm, where he refers to building a house. What everyone does seem to be in agreement about is the fact that this psalm and the next one, Psalm 128, are fairly rare examples of wisdom psalms within the Psalter. It's quite striking as you read these two psalms, how they are very different from a hymn of praise or lament that we are familiar with. They read more like an elongated proverb or a collection of short proverbs. Now, for what it's worth, there is absolutely no reason to dispute Solomon's authorship. And the fact that this psalm is an example of wisdom literature adds weight, I think, to that argument. Some writers have also pointed out that he seems to have included a teasing reference to himself in verse 2, which, by the way, is another disputed verse in the psalm. And there he speaks about the beloved, or as it is in the original Hebrew, his beloved. And it literally means beloved of Yahweh. And that's the name that was given to Solomon, who you remember was the son of David and Bathsheba, by Nathan the prophet on the instructions of God himself, as is recorded for us in 2 Samuel 12:25. And there's another clue to Solomon's authorship in one of the key thoughts of this psalm. It's the word or phrase, as it appears in English, in vain, which comes 3 times in the first section. And while it's not the same word, it has basically the same meaning as the frequently repeated word in Ecclesiastes, which was also written by Solomon, and which is translated there as vanity or meaningless, among other things. So what is this psalm all about? Well, it's clearly in 2 sections, 1 to 2 and 3 to 5. And I think the clear meaning of the second section helps us come to the right conclusion about the apparently less clear meaning of the first section. You see, the issue is this in verse 1. Is Solomon referring to a physical house, or does he actually have a household, a family, if you like, in mind? Now, if he's laying down principles of house building, then the sudden change of subject in verses 3 to 5 seems a bit jarring. But the fact that he talks about children in the second section strongly suggests he is talking about a family or household in the first section. Added to that, I think Solomon, the wise and clever man, is making a play on Hebrew words here, because in Hebrew, so the experts tell me, the word builder and the word son sound very similar. So the second section, again in typically Hebrew fashion, zooms in on one aspect of the more general principles that are being taught in the first section. So let's divide up this psalm and work through the 2 sections. First of all, in 1 to 2, a household built by God. And the key to these verses, as I've said, lies in the phrase in vain, which in the Hebrew stands at the beginning of each relevant clause so as to stress its importance and significance. The overall premise, I think, is simple and straightforward. Don't think that you can accomplish anything of any value or any permanence without God's help and involvement. In the immediate context of the home, as well as in any other situation, we should work hard and be diligent in all we do, not be lazy or negligent. But we should never depend on ourselves. After all, Jesus himself said, "Without me, you can do nothing." And to try to do so is pointless, useless, meaningless, and in vain, says Solomon. Just a quick comment on that well-known phrase at the end of verse 2. He gives to his beloved sleep. Now, remembering the basic rule that context determines meaning, this is not, as it is often understood, a blanket guarantee that the child of God can claim a good night's sleep from God. What Solomon is doing is he's assuring the faithful, diligent child of God that if you do your part and trust God to do his part in blessing and providing for you, you can sleep well at night, knowing that God will prosper your efforts. And you don't need to gain a stress-induced ulcer in the process. Warren Wiersbe, in his usual clear and helpful way, sums up the meaning of verses 1 and 2 in this way. This is what he writes. He says, if verse 1 warns against overconfidence, we can do it without God's help. Verse 2 warns against overwork and anxious toil. I have to do it all right now. So a household built by God, and then verses 3 to 5, a heritage given by God. Children, both male, as is really the case in verse 3a, and offspring generally, the fruit of the womb in the second half of the verse, are a gift from God, and as such bring blessings from God. Now, perhaps in a way that is slightly strange to our Western ears, Solomon tells us that children are both a blessing that bring joy, but also useful. You see, large families ensured security and support in your old age, sometimes even a defense against enemies. And in the Middle East of Solomon's day, to be childless was considered a matter of shame and disgrace, even indicative of God's displeasure. Now, it's the nature of Jewish wisdom literature that wise sayings are not guaranteed facts, but statements of general principles. So we need to bear in mind that just as God doesn't always guarantee a good night's sleep, neither is everyone supposed to get married and build a household. And not all married couples are able to have children. But whether we have children of our own or children in our wider families, we are called to help bring them up, as it were, in the fear and admonition of the Lord. And so cooperate with God in the establishing of strong spiritual households that will be a blessing to everyone in our communities and greatly honoring to the Lord. But in closing, just a very quick word about why this psalm is included in the Songs of Ascent. What's the connection? Well, I think it's this. What better way is there to build the household with the Lord's help, to bring up the children in the right way, in the fear of the Lord, than to take them to the place of corporate gathered worship? And as the pilgrims went up to Jerusalem and the temple on those great festivals of the year, they went with their families. They went in great caravans of families. And so they were doing their part and then looking to God to do his part to build the houses.